Hello, Wes Anderson has returned for his 12th feature film, The Phoenician Scheme, which came out in theaters just a couple of weeks ago, and I am going to be reviewing it in this video. Anderson, one of my favorite filmmakers working today, specifically what he has been doing lately in the latter half of his career has really intrigued me. His past couple films, The French Dispatch and Asteroid City, are incredibly dense, have a star-studded ensemble, and are very stylistically daring, but are also quite emotionally affecting and just on my wavelength in terms of the stories that they're telling. And while critics have bemoaned the fact that Wes is essentially making the same movie every time, I do think that he is constantly experimenting in small ways and always pushing himself to do something different with each film, and is certainly one of the most ambitious filmmakers working today. In the case of The Phoenician Scheme, he has scaled back a little bit in terms of its narrative, but is still maintaining that visual ambition that has really been a trademark of his entire career. This film still contains a star-studded ensemble, but it is primarily and tightly focused upon three leads. Benicio Del Toro stars as Zaza Corda, the first time that he has led an Anderson film. His character Zaza Corda is one of the richest men in all of Europe who has defied death continually throughout his life, avoiding multiple assassination attempts and surviving countless plane crashes, but in the process of becoming so wealthy has become very morally bankrupt and emotionally cold, separating himself from his family, particularly his daughter Liesl, played by Threapleton in this film. Even if there's a lot going on within the Phoenician Scheme, this father-daughter relationship is really the core of it. And for the most part, I find it to be quite emotionally compelling. Benicio and Threapleton play off each other quite well, both comedically and dramatically. And they both have pretty distinct character arcs. Liesl is having to give up her religion, in a sense, to try to rectify the wrongs of her morally bankrupt dad, while Corda is being compelled to actually be a good person and care about other people, as well as having to sacrifice the death-defying life that he has lived now that he has someone else to live for. It very subtly creeps into the film, which I think works very well for Corda as a character, as he himself is not expecting to become so emotionally attached to his daughter. But through small lines of dialogue, Anderson slowly shows his hand to the audience about what this film is actually about. Plot-wise, it's quite episodic in nature, as these two characters, along with Bjorn, Michael Cera's character, who I will get to later, are going around to a lot of Corda's financial partners in order to try to get them to cover the gap, essentially to pay more money for this Phoenician scheme they're all embarking on. And this makes up basically the entire second act of this film, which honestly I found to be a little bit weak. These meetings they have with these partners are quite formulaic and a little bit predictable in a sense once you get to the third or fourth one. Corda asks them for money, they yell at him, he does something that endears him to them, and then eventually they concede to give some amount of money, but not all the amount of money, which leads to Corda having to pay for the gap himself. In terms of their narrative framework and the way that they flow, these 4 or 5 sequences in the middle of this film are essentially the exact same, and rely upon the gags within the sequences to really stand out, which leads to some of them working and some of them not. I particularly really like the Cranston and Hank sequence, which has this very strange, goofy basketball game that they all play together. But the rest of these sequences are either passable, forgettable, or just plain boring. In particular, I found what Scarlett Johansson was doing here to be quite underwhelming. Granted, she isn't given a lot in the script to really work with, so I don't necessarily think it's her fault, but she is delivering a strange performance with this really bizarre accent that really does not work and is quite distracting. And on top of it, this particular sequence really adds no new information to the film and is supposed to be the one that kind of vaults you into the third act, but it really doesn't function very well. Overall, I did find the narrative of this movie to be a little bit bland, but luckily Anderson got me hooked in this film through the emotions of it as well as the visual style, as he typically does. This film sees Anderson working with a different cinematographer for the first time in his entire career, but this film does look basically the exact same as every other Wes Anderson movie, although there is some difference in the color palette. It's a lot cooler in the hues of it, and Bruno and Wes take a lot of risks specifically with the camera movement within this film. I particularly found the camera movement within the Benedict Cumberbatch and Benicio Del Toro fight scene to be really inventive. This one generally has like a cartoony vibe, a lot of slapstick comedy, a lot of cartoonish violence within it, that led to it being one of the funnier films that Anderson has come out with lately, specifically because Michael Cera is so incredible in it. This has been said many times before this film even came out, but Michael Cera was really born to be in a Wes Anderson movie, and he does not disappoint in this film. Incredibly goofy, but also very whimsical performance that has a sense of heart to it, and really works as this comedic relief third wheel character to the Threapleton and Benicio Del Toro character dynamic. Benicio, meanwhile, is also quite great, delivering a very wry and deadpan, very cynical performance here. You really feel the deadness of his character's eyes every time he's on screen. And you also feel him slowly warming up to the world and to his daughter in particular, played quite well by Mia Threapleton. Like I said, I wasn't a huge fan of what was going on narratively, but I did find this father-daughter dynamic to be the most emotionally compelling part of the film. And Anderson knows exactly when to return to the heart of this film, even if it does kind of get caught in the weeds within the second act a little bit. There's also some things going on with religious themes as well as some political ideas going on here with Corda's character that I'm not entirely sure how to properly dissect or decipher, but I will say that the religious sequences are quite great. They have this gorgeous black and white cinematography and a lot of surrealism that is not very common for Anderson, but I think he does quite well, specifically within his writing. Much like Asteroid City, this sees Wes continuing to become a little bit more of an abstract screenwriter, presenting ideas to the audience without necessarily explaining what they fully mean. But I found the way that Anderson was going about talking about religion here to be quite nuanced and incredibly intriguing. And he's definitely using it to explore ideas of morality and what legacy someone is leaving behind. These are usually themes that filmmakers will explore much later on in their careers, and I guess Anderson is kind of getting along in years at this point. But it does feel quite early to see him grappling with his legacy on screen like this. But I do think that's in a sense what he is doing in this film, asking himself what means the most to him within his life, and the final answer that he comes up with is his family. The conclusion of the Phoenician Scheme is essentially getting at that is really all you need is to just have a family and have people that you care about and people that care about you, even if it leads to a stripped back lifestyle or not necessarily succeeding to the world standards, which I find to be quite sweet and wholesome and a very uncomplicatedly optimistic view of the world. So both thematically, narratively, and stylistically, this is one of his smaller scale and lighter films, especially in recent years. And as a result, it feels a little bit inconsequential within the grander scheme of his filmography, at least right now. Maybe in hindsight, in a few years, this will have a bit more weightiness, a bit more significance to it. But for now, it does feel a little bit like second-tier Anderson to me. And especially within that second act, sees him kind of going through the motions of his filmmaking style, delivering something that is passable but not necessarily fully great. But the thematic and emotional core of the film is intact, largely due to the three great lead performances, and the humor is pretty solid here as well. Also, again, the visual style is really, really great. That seems like a given for any Wes Anderson movie at this point. So I do think that this was a pretty good time, albeit a very flawed film from Wes. And that's really all I gotta say. I think The Phoenician Scheme is pretty good. If you're a fan of Wes Anderson, you're gonna like it. If you're not hooked on Wes Anderson yet, I don't know if you'll like it or not, but nevertheless, maybe give it a watch, see what you think. And yeah, that's all I really gotta say. Wes Anderson Ranked coming out next week. Gonna be great, gonna be fun, and that's it. So goodbye.